Welcome to another episode of Cats Talk Wednesday, everybody. My name is Vinny Hardy. Got my man Terry TB Brown here. And Terry, we have us a big time guest this evening. My goodness, we are honored to have this gentleman here with us.
Definitely. When you said who we had coming on a couple of weeks ago, I got excited because Mr. Host, Jim, as he wants us to call him, he's a legend in these parts. So I'm excited.
Absolutely. We have marketing pioneer, entrepreneur, legend, any description you want to use. Jim Host is here, and he has a new book to talk about as well. Jim, we are honored to have you on our podcast, sir.
It's a pleasure for me to be with two UK fanatics, and I'm glad to be with you. The name of my book is Changing the Game, and it's about the history of college sports marketing and how I got started doing University of Kentucky stuff in a number of universities, including Tennessee, that we did over a period of time. So I'm delighted to be with both of you.
Yeah, I was telling you when before we started recording that when they reached out and asked if they wanted to have you, if you wanted, have you on our podcast, I was like, well, yeah. I mean, wow. So I was just honored to receive that email and honored that you were wanting to come on with us. We definitely appreciated it. And the book, like you mentioned, Changing the Game. Um, was it difficult to compile it? Was it easy? What was the journey and the process like in getting this book completed?
Well, the way it got started is that my wife and I had Al Smith, who was very famous in Kentucky for doing Comment on Kentucky Education Television, and Len Press, who founded KET and was my professor at UK in the 50s, who came to our house for dinner, and they started talking to me about, you, with all the stuff you've done, you need to do a book. So I did 22 two-hour audio history sessions with Terry Birdwhistle, who then was the head of Kentucky Libraries in the oral history department. And from that, they transcribed all those audio histories. And every time that I read one of those transcripts, I remembered other stuff. And so I kept notes of everything that had happened over all these years, compiling the notes and compiling those audio histories, and then found a guy by the name of Dr. Eric Moyen, who wrote the book on the first great UK president, whose name was Frank McVeigh, who was president of UK from 1917 to 1940. And I liked his style, and he's a sports fanatic. He's now a top education professor at Mississippi State University, but he's originally from Lexington, got his PhD from UK. And I said, what I want you to do is fact check everything and make sure that everything that I'm saying is accurate and it will hold up the test of time. I also wanted to do a book that could be used for teaching sports marketing and sports administration, so young students would understand how all of this came about and how did things happen that happened. And so as a result, the book came together, and it took me 5 years to do it, but it's a compilation of interesting facts along the way, and a lot of people in it that a lot of people know. And if anybody's interested in the book, you can get it through jimhostbook.com, called Changing the Game.
Absolutely, and it's so much good stuff in there, and you're reflecting on everything, like you said. Being born in Pennsylvania, living in New York, living in Virginia, living in West Virginia, before finally that last move to your home, like you said, in Ashland, as you're about to become a teenager. It's such a fantastic journey. Um, this is a hypothetical, I guess. First of all, though, how do you think things would have been different? Say your last stop was in West Virginia or Virginia. Do you still think you would have been in radio, as you would have, tried to become a major leaguer, you still think some of your life would have still been the same? It wouldn't have been exactly the same, but how do you think it would have
I
played
grew
out?
I grew up listening to radio broadcasters when I would be as a young kid, even before being a teenager. My parents would have to come rustle the radio up underneath the covers where I'd be listening to Harry Carey with the St. Louis Cardinals, or Rosie Rosewell with the Pittsburgh Pirates, or White Hoyt with the Cincinnati Reds. And I was such a baseball fanatic. I grew up dreaming that I wanted to be a major leaguer, and of course signed a pro baseball contract and blew my arm out one night. But in the meantime, as a kid, I would walk down the street describing the leaves on the trees and trying to become professional in that regard. So I think it was destined. I don't think it would have made any difference where I am would end up, whether it be West Virginia or Virginia. I would have found my way into it.
Wow, that's awesome. And some more of the things that just kind of stood out to me as I was reading as you're growing up, I wanted to ask you about, you seem to be a pretty responsible, pretty level-headed kid. You're always thinking of ways to make some cash and working side jobs and doing this and that. Why do you think your dad was so terrified for you to drive his car? You seem like a pretty level-headed kid.
Well, because I was the oldest. Most money my dad ever made in his life was $8,000 a year. And I had two younger brothers, one 2 years younger and one 4 years younger. And they lived together in a room. I lived in one room, my mother and dad in the other room. We had one bathroom, a very small house. I walked half a mile to a corner and would thumb to school every day back in the years when you could thumb. Never drove a car in my life, never had a car in my life until I signed a pro baseball contract. I had no car when I came to University of Kentucky. Walked every place, thumbed every place, or rode with somebody else. And we had no money, so nobody needs to talk to me about how you grew up without having anything. And I worked for everything. I delivered papers every morning at 4 o'clock. I worked at the YMCA at night for 60 cents an hour, folding towels and renting rooms for $2 a night for Railroad YMCA, close to the railroad tracks in Ashland. So it was nothing for me to make $1 here, make $1 there. I had to buy my own clothes, had to buy my own books, and so on. So I understood the value of hard work and the value of discipline and the value of timeliness and all of that. And I just grew up that way, and I've always been that way, and I'm that way today.
Exactly. Now those secret driving lessons with your mom, how did those go?
Well, my dad was, as I said, he was a very, very fastidious person who would come home every night and work a slide rule, doing his work from the day back when before computers, when people used slide rules. He worked in a tannery, had a foreman's position, and was very dedicated to his work. He kept a track of every penny that came in and every penny that went out. I've got his diary of his journal entries of all of the entries he made when we were kids. I've got that today, and my mother gave it to me before she died. And to think about what they did to be able to provide food for us growing up, and then what I did. So I became very responsible as a young kid, always looking out for my brothers, always looking out for others. And so it was pretty easy for me to be able to understand what it took to run a company, what it took to try to be successful, and how to treat others, and so on.
Absolutely. Now, I'm just kind of jumping to different points throughout the book, but you talked about wanting to be a big leaguer, and you got to put on that White Sox uniform before you hurt your shoulder. Speaking of the White Sox, tomorrow they're playing the Yankees in Iowa at the Field of Dreams. What do you think about that?
I think that is phenomenal. I can see that movie. I've seen that movie about a half a dozen times. with Kevin Costner and those old Black Sox, the ones that were in the scandal in 1919 that are coming out of the shoeless Joe Jackson, who's probably the greatest player who ever played the game, who's not in the Hall of Fame because of the scandal where they accused him of taking money, and he went to his grave saying he didn't take the money and he didn't throw a game and so on. But I just think that is so phenomenal. It's so great, and really it's the genesis of this great game we call baseball that is still America's pastime, and people have tried to diss it in every way they could. The game's too long, takes too long, and so on. But people love the game, still love the game, and they will always love the game. It's the only thing about it. It's the only game that is a team game, and yet it's an individual game. Basketball is a team game, and it's not necessarily an individual game unless somebody breaks loose and makes a great shot. But in baseball, you're a team, but you have to make the plays individually. Whereas in basketball, you can rely upon others. In football, you can rely upon others as a team. In baseball, it's a team game, but it's an individual game. And that's why it's such a classic, great game.
That's for sure. And I've never understood why they wanted to speed it up either. I remember I'm a Braves fan, but the second game I ever went to, I was 12. Me and my dad went up to Old Riverfront to see the Reds and the Pirates. It was 1990, the year the Reds ended up winning the World Series. And this was my first time in Riverfront. So I'm just looking around and taking it all in and eating my hot dog. And it was a pitcher's duel. So it's 1, 2, 3 innings, 1, 2, 3 innings. I look up, it's the 6th inning. I'm like, man, it's gonna be time to go soon. And I wanted it. I wanted the game to last longer. I've never been one, to say speed the game up. I wanted to sit and soak it up. And if it lasts 4 or 5 hours, so be it.
I think there's a lot of other people like that too, for sure. But it's a great game, and it's continuing to be a great game. The Reds are playing the Braves tonight, in fact, at the new ballpark that the Braves have in northern Atlanta. And I haven't been to Truist Field yet. I went to the Turner ballpark numerous times, and Fulton Stadium prior to that.
That's it.
When Hank Aaron hit that home run in Fulton Stadium to break Babe Ruth's record.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about all of the great players that have played for the Braves over a period of time, and Atlanta has become a real hotbed of baseball as a result.
Absolutely. Now, another thing that jumped out to me in the book is when you had to meet with Mr. Kincaid, and he's got all of these radio stations and his employees' names. What FCC regulations was he breaking if he didn't?
It used to be that you could only own 7 radio stations in the country, and they all had to be not in the same viewing area or listening area as the other. What he did is he wanted to control all of the radio stations in central Kentucky, and you couldn't do that. Although today you could do it. But in those years, you couldn't do it. So what he did is he would buy these stations and put them in somebody else's name, but he controlled them. And so he owned the station in Winchester, the station in Richmond, the station in Danville, the station in Frankfort, and the key station in Lexington. And so he had all these people out there that would report to him, but he had them in their names. So that's, and today you could do that. In those years, you couldn't do that.
Okay, that makes sense. Now I was like, why in the world does he have them in all these different names? I knew I had to ask you about that.
It was in violation of Federal Communications Commission rules then, because you can only own 7 television stations, you can only own 7 radio stations, but you couldn't own them within the distance of the other. In other words, you couldn't own a station that reached into Louisville. The station had to reach further than that, and in terms of its market.
So it was kind of a jurisdictional thing from the airwave standpoint.
Yeah, their jurisdictional thing, so that people didn't have monopolies. See, the idea was to keep somebody from creating a monopoly. Today, you've got iHeart, which is the old Clear Channel Communications, which is fundamentally a monopoly because they've got stations literally in every market in the United States. so these, it's like AT&T. They broke up AT&T and created all the baby bells many years ago. Now you've got AT&T back to where they're like they were. So things always go back to the way they were at times, it seems.
That's right. That circle comes back. It sure does. Another thing that stood out to me is when you moved back to Kentucky from DC. You got a young wife and a young family, and you were able to focus on work, but your family's in Kentucky, and you're like, this isn't working, and you just boom, you moved back
Yeah.
to
Well,
Kentucky.
I have been getting promoted by Procter and Gamble, who I was with continually, and they promoted me again to go to Philadelphia. And I said, you know what, my Kentucky roots are calling me back, and I had fallen in love with Kentucky and made up my mind. I wanted to live here the rest of my life. I wanted to grow my family in Kentucky. I wanted to be deeply associated with the University of Kentucky, which gave me a college education. And so I came back and I took my real estate test, my insurance test in the same week, and I built a pretty good sized business in a short period of time, and then got involved in politics, went to Frankfurt, and that again was another shift that changed the course of my life. And then ran for lieutenant governor of the state back before governor and lieutenant governor ran together in those years. Somebody for governor ran, somebody for lieutenant governor ran, and you could have a Republican governor and a Democrat lieutenant governor reverse. So I ran for lieutenant governor, won the primary, and got my butt beat in the general election, thank God, or I'd still be in politics. And I came back and then started what became Host Communications with no money in the bank and no quote unquote hope, except I always had great hope and great feeling that I could make things work, and I did.
Yeah, that's because I by the time I've just heard your name and you're already who you were by the time I knew who you were. So everything that you'd already established has already been in place and up and running by the time the 80s. I'm watching the tournament as a kid and all that. You've already set all this up. So it was just so interesting seeing how you came to all that. It'd be like as I was reading, it'd be like a kid now, I guess, a 5 or 6 year old kid that in 20 years starts reading about Jeff Bezos. Oh, well, he did all this. So that was kind of me finding out about you as I'm reading the book. You were already Jim Host by the time I knew you. So, 20 years from now, that kid would be like, oh, Bezos did this and this and that. So that's kind of the analogy I used for learning about you through this book.
Well, it's let me say this. You can do it. Anybody today that has enough drive and enough discipline. I call it drive and discipline. The ability of being able to completely gear your mind and your effort and your focus into to doing something and you're never going to be successful at anything if you don't have passion for it. If you don't have passion for it and love, you're not going to be successful. I had great passion for it, and I had all these impediments that were roadblocks, and I would hit a roadblock and bloody my head and go around the corner and hit another roadblock and bloody my head and keep going through the roadblocks till I got through the end. And so if you read the book carefully, there were so many aspects of it where it looked like I was going to fail, but I always had great faith in myself. If you do not have faith in yourself, there is no way you can ever be successful. Because if you don't have faith in yourself, how can anybody else have faith in you?
That's very true. One of those roadblocks that stood out to me is when you drew the short straw and you had to call the game at Georgia Tech in the rain.
In the rain, sitting in the end zone on a set a table up in the end zone in bleachers, and I was about halfway up in the bleachers, and I could barely see the other end of the field because it was those humpback fields. And so I was looking over the humpback to the other end, and it was raining. So there's no way I could tell what the yard marker was or even the numbers of the uniforms. You talk about making it up. I would make it up off the scoreboard. I didn't have video on the scoreboard then, so I couldn't see what was going on. but I described the game and didn't miss a lick, it's one of the great experiences of my life. I can just talking to you about it now, I can just visualize that game raining, nothing over my head. So all of the spotting boards I had, and I did it by myself. I set up I did all the engineering. I did the play-by-play. I didn't have a spotter. I didn't have anybody calling the numbers for me. I had my own headset on. I had my own engineering stuff on. It's a wonder that the thing didn't get shorted out with all the rain, because it was raining like the dickens. But I got through the game, called the game, and it will always have an indelible memory in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. Because that, just the visual of reading about it, much less living through it.
And we got people today. This is why at one time we had over 25 networks in the country, all the way from Kentucky to Tennessee to Florida State to Texas to a number of other schools in the country. And I go in these broadcast booths now, and you've got a cast of thousands in the broadcast booth doing what I did by myself in the rain in the end zone of Georgia Tech. So I think about that all the time. And people, when I tell that story, people don't believe it, but it's the truth. That happened.
Unbelievable. You mentioned Tennessee, and like I told you, I grew up in Harlan County, so I'm right on the border of Tennessee. The way you kind of, in football recruiting, every coach wants to lock down the state. You had Tennessee football being broadcast in Kentucky, and they weren't really trying to hear you when you told them to stop. So you went and started broadcasting Kentucky basketball games in Harrogate and Jellicoe, which I thought was hilarious, and it got their attention.
It got their attention because they said, you can't come into Tennessee. And I said, you can't come into Kentucky. And so we made a deal. You stay out of Kentucky and I'll stay out of Tennessee. And so but what was happening was all the stations, including Middlesboro, Harlan, Pineville, all those counties that exist on that border down there, were taking Tennessee football because it was a lot more popular than Kentucky football. And all of them wanted Kentucky basketball because it was a popular thing. And I would tell these stations, you can't get Kentucky basketball unless you take Kentucky football. No. I said, not going to get Tennessee football either.
You laid the law down on them for sure.
That's how we built the network, though. That's how we built the network and how we created the following for Kentucky football in those years then too.
Yeah, for sure. And the history you made, the first two scholarships for baseball, UK baseball, and you're one of the recipients of that. So that's just another, unbelievable.
Well, I had already signed with Eastern Kentucky. I was a basketball manager. They wouldn't let me play baseball because they were from basketball because I was 6'3", and 6'3" was pretty good size in those years. And I was a center, if you can believe that. Today, I wouldn't be a guard because I wouldn't be big enough. But in those years, I was a center. And but I was the slowest center in the world. I could shoot really well. And so they said, look, you're too good a baseball player. We're afraid you're going to get hurt and you're going to hurt your arm. We want you to play baseball and be a basketball. So I was basketball team manager. So I said, well, if I'm going to be a basketball team manager, I'm going to be the best one in the state. And so I did pretty well at that. And Paul McBrayer, who was a coach at Eastern, coached the All-Star team. And I was the manager of the Kentucky All-Star team in my senior year. And he liked what I did. And he knew I was a baseball player. So he said, and Eastern wanted to sign me to a baseball scholarship, but they only had a half a scholarship. Well, I couldn't afford to go to school because my dad had no money for college. And so, and they didn't have Pell Grants and all that sort of thing then. So he said, I'm going to sign you to a half a scholarship to be my basketball manager. And Turkey Hughes will sign you to a half scholarship. So you have a full scholarship to come to Eastern. So I had signed at Eastern, and now I'm pitching in the state summer pro championship in Paintsville, Kentucky against Steve Hamilton. I ended up becoming a major league baseball player, left-hander. And I beat him 2-1. And I came off and we won the state championship. Our team did. and I came off the mound, and Harry Lancaster, who was Coach Rupp's assistant, was also the baseball coach. And he was there, and he said, Jim, I said, I want to offer you, we've already signed a pitcher from Manual in Louisville. We want you to be the second full-time scholarship to come to Kentucky. And I said, full scholarship? You mean room and board and books? And he said, yeah, and you get $15 a month laundry money. That was our spending money. And I said, well, I've already signed at Eastern. He said, no. He said, I'll call Turkey. He understands, and I'll tell him that you're not coming to Eastern. You're coming to Kentucky. If you'll come to Kentucky. I said, show me where I can sign. So that was it.
And you mentioned too, with everything's changing. You wrote about that, how you adapted to change. We're seeing name, image, and likeness now for the players that just came into effect last month. You were bowling for a semi-pro team and had to quit.
Bernie Shively used to hand out $15 in stacks of dollar bills, and you would stand in line with the football players, the basketball players, and there were two of us on baseball scholarship, one on a track scholarship, and that was it. There was no other scholarships. The women didn't have athletics then, and so basketball would always go first, football would go second. Well, all at once there's just three of us left. And Shive would start off with being in his office. He was the AD, and he'd stand where he had a legal pad or a sheet of paper, and he'd check off your name when he gave you, and then he'd hand out those dollar bills one by one by one. And while he was doing that, $15, and $15 was everything to me then, because I had no money, and it was my cash for the month. And if I wanted to go to the movies, or if I wanted to go get a hamburger, or separate. I was able to do it with that $15. They call it laundry money. I didn't get my laundry done. I figured out how to get it clean some way. And I got to know some guys that were from Lexington, and sometimes their mothers would do stuff for me. But that $15 was everything. And he would look up and he'd say, "Are you bowling?" And I said, "Yeah, I love to bowl." He said, "You bowling for money?" I said, "What do you mean for money?" He said, "Aren't you bowling for Budweiser? Aren't they?" And I was pretty good at bowling. I said, "Yeah, we're state champion. How much they paying you?" I said, "Mr. Shively, I think I get $25 if I hit." He said, "The next time you take that, your scholarship's revoked. Do you understand it?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I got the message."
Man, I get to ask a couple more. I could keep you forever, but I don't want to take up too much of your time, Jim. You mentioned, Harry Lancaster, who was Coach Rupp's assistant, who coached you in baseball. He became the AD later. How awkward was that for him and Coach Rupp when he became Coach Rupp's boss? Was it kind of awkward? Was it really awkward?
It wasn't just awkward. They didn't talk. They didn't speak. Coach Rupp really resented Coach Lancaster being his boss. And when I formed my company called Jim Host and Associates, I did a book called Adolph Rupp as I Know Him by Harry Lancaster. It was the first book I did. And he talked in that book about his relationship with Coach Rupp, which in the later years, when Coach Rupp got sick, Coach Lancaster went to see him, and they made up, and they shared stories. They were very, very close. And when Coach Lancaster, when I did my book for him and I took it to him, he wrote a message in the inside. He said, "To the young man I coached that made me the proudest." That's probably the greatest single inscription that I have ever received from anybody, because he was the toughest SOB that anybody ever was around, but he taught discipline. And I question today whether a lot of the players that play today could have played for him.
Wow. And I know this wasn't funny for you, but I chuckled when you guys had the accident out in LA and you wake up and Coach Rupp is saying, "Oh God, is he dead?"
Well, he always sat behind the driver of the bus. And when I came on the bus, I always sat right behind the well. He'd come in right directly across from him. And he and I had a great relationship. And Shive, if Shive was alone, the AD, he always sat he would never sit in the front seat. He'd sit in the second seat. Nobody would ever sit in the front seat close to him. I did, because I love to be close to somebody this famous and talk to him and listen to him and so on. Well, we had played Southern California on Friday night. The bus was going through a stop sign or through a red light, and the bus had the green light, and this car ran the red light on their side, and this bus plowed into that car broadside, took the car across the street, wrapped it around one of those poles and so on, and I went head over heels over the area in front down into the well and right on top of my head. And I was all washed in blood and stuff because it opened a big gash in my forehead and top of my head, and I was knocked out. And so Coach Rupp, I'm coming out of the daze, and I could hear the moans of the people under me. It killed 3 people, and I could hear the moans of the people under me, and who the bus was over top of this car, and I hear Coach Rupp saying, "My God, is he dead?" and talking to me. And of course, I came out of the daze. Well, let me tell you about him. As tough as he was a tough guy. He went with me to the hospital while the rest of them there was a police car that came up, took me to the hospital, and they wrapped my head and put stitches in it and so on. And I did the game the next night, the radio game the next night, with big gauze over my head, looking like a turban on my head, and did the game with UCLA the next night, which was the first year that John Wooden was coaching at UCLA. And they had an African-American kid by the name of Willie Knowles, who was a great player for UCLA then. But those are the kind of memories that you remember that you never forget.
Absolutely. And another thing that struck me funny, I don't even know if you were meaning to be funny when you wrote it, but your description of Walter Byer when you first met him,
I wasn't saying funny. I was describing what I saw. He was first of all, I've been in the president's office. I've been in the Oval Office of every president since Nixon, and I've never been in awe of any of them. I was close to being in awe of Clinton because he was the smartest one of them all that I met. But I've been in the Oval Office, talked to him, I've been around him. I was in awe of Walter Byers. He's the smartest single individual I was ever around in my life. And when I went in to see him to begin with, he's sitting by himself. He never had a scrap of paper in front of him. He never made a note. He had a steel trap mind, and he had he had long sideburns. He had the worst toupee I've ever seen in my life. He had an eye that was a kind of a wandering, we call it a wandering eye, but it was a deficiency in one of his eyes. And he was so deceiving in terms of the way he looked at you, and he talked, and he always wore cowboy boots. Wow. And he was a rancher from Kansas. It was his background in agriculture. He owned a huge cattle farm in Kansas. And he was the most unique person, strongest guy, smartest guy I was ever around. And I just remember it like it was yesterday, that first meeting with him.
Unbelievable. But yeah, that wandering left eye is what it made me chuckle. But but I'm just getting all the vivid descriptions as you're describing them. Being from my neck of the woods, I gotta ask you about your most memorable moments of K. Wood Ledford. Just a favorite memory, favorite story, favorite moment, or something from when you were with K. Wood.
When 1979, first of all, I'd gotten to know him when I was doing the Kentucky Central Network as one of 5 originations in 1959. So I got to know K. Wood well. He started doing UK stuff in 1953 for a local station in Lexington, WLEX, and then he went to Louisville and went to work for WHAS and became their broadcaster. And it was the dominant 50,000 watt station in Kentucky, so it had extensive reach, 40 states in the country because of its clear channel signal. And so he and Claude Sullivan were really the 2 voices of Kentucky football and basketball. There were 5 networks. Well, I did one of them, and so I got to know Kaywood. And so now fast forward to 1979, where I've now got the rights exclusively for Kentuckian, and he was doing the games for me. And so I went to see him in Louisville, and I said, I want you to come to Lexington. I'm going to establish a company for you called Kaywood Ledford Productions, Inc. And as a result of that, I said, I can get you enough revenue to make sure that you're solid forever. I'll work with you on building your company. I'll own 50%, you'll own 50%, and it'll be called Kaywood Ledford Productions, Inc. You're the president and CEO. All I want you to do is meet with me once a week. We'll do it at 8 o'clock on Monday morning or Tuesday morning, whatever fits your schedule when you're not on the road. So the funny thing about Kaywood is he would come in my office and he'd always kind of look around to see if anybody was there. And then he'd say, Jim, this is graveyard. And I said, first time he said that, I said, what's that mean? He said, if you repeat it, you're dead. And so today I use that expression with other people. George, this is graveyard, or Vinny, this is graveyard. That means that I'm going to tell you something confidential, and if you repeat it, you're dead.
That's it. Goes no further. Last thing, Jim, of all the things you've accomplished, the baseball scholarship, the bundling rights, politics, the Lexington Convention Center, Rupp Arena, the Yum Center, everything you've had a part in, all these accomplishments, which one are you the most proud of?
The one I'm most proud of is what we've just recently accomplished that I started on in 2003, and which has been the toughest thing I've ever done. And it's a project called Kentucky Wired. It's getting broadband to every single county of the state. It's been totally volunteer. I've been involved in it, started in state government, kept after it to get it done. And we're now the first state in the United States to have broadband connecting every single county with high-speed broadband. And we were 47th in the country. We're going to be first in the country in broadband speed as soon as we connect all of the hollows of Eastern Kentucky and connect all the vast area of Western Kentucky, all the rural parts of Kentucky. And that'll be done with the money that the feds have just appropriated, with bills passed, with money that'll be coming to the states, and Kentucky's already got a pretty good sized allocation that will then go toward broadband. That means that health situations, as opposed to flying a helicopter from UK Medical Center into Harlan, you're going to be able to put a device on their heart and be able to immediately transmit telemedicine to UK Medical Center with high-speed broadband. You're going to be able to take kids in rural parts of Kentucky who have not been able to have any broadband of any sort. So the only way they could do their homework is go to the local McDonald's and get on the Wi-Fi, and that's going to solve all of that. So we're going to solve the education issues, and that will spur Kentucky to huge economic development capability in the future, because industry now will come where there's high-speed broadband. And of all the things that I've been involved in, that's probably what I'm proudest of.
Wow, that is unbelievable. And all the work and that work, like you said, just connecting the state, the Commonwealth, through the internet, through high-speed internet, that is an amazing accomplishment on top of what you've already done. So just an honor to be able to talk with you for a few minutes about the book, Changing the Game, My Career in Collegiate Sports Marketing. Everybody, what was the website again for everybody to go and pick it up?
They can go to jimhostbook.com, which is an internet thing, and the books go to a fulfillment house. They bring them to me. I sign them. I individually autograph every one of them through jimhostbook.com, and then they're mailed out to the individual wherever they're ordered from. And we've been filling orders from literally every state in the country, from some foreign places and so on. And I'm delighted to do it. And if you want to have another repeat of this to ask more questions about the rest of the book when we have more time, I'm glad to do it for you too, Benny.
Well, we definitely would love to have you back. We sure would, Jim. Thank you so much. Was honored. I'm definitely enjoying the book and definitely love to have you back on to talk about different parts of the book that I didn't get to ask you about. So this was so much fun.
You need to ask me about how Patino got hired in Kentucky and why and what we went through with that. You need to ask about what happened with the CBS negotiation with us for NCAA rights. There's a lot of other how the KFC Yum Center was done and all the issues we had with that in Louisville, on and on. So I'm glad to come back at any time. Let me know.
Absolutely. And Terry is a Louisville guy, so I know he would have had some Louisville perspective questions. And that the picture of yourself and Patino in the book, you described him as a challenge to work with. So I was definitely going to ask about that as well. So we'll save that for the next one for sure, Jim, and get into that.
Look forward to it, Benny. Good luck to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Have a good evening, Jim.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks again to Jim Host. I'm having a hard time saying Jim and not Mr. Host, but he gave us permission to call him Jim. So definitely enjoyed that. Such an honor to be able to talk with him about the book, and definitely looking forward to having him on again to talk about different portions and segments of the book that we didn't get to in this time. Such a nice guy, a legend for real. Had some legendary guests on here before, and he goes right up there to the top of that list with all those other great guests we've been fortunate to have here on Cast Talk Wednesday. Hope you enjoyed that, and try to bring you the rest of the show. Hey, we had some technical difficulties, but we'll get on to the rest of the show. Hopefully myself and TB will be right here with you. Thanks again for listening, y'all.